The frozen crust of snow cracked beneath Lydia Foster's boot just as the ground gave way, and in one terrifying instant, she plunged waist-deep into something that gripped her legs like iron hands hidden beneath the pristine white surface. The morning had been so beautiful when she set out from St. George, Utah, the December sun glinting off the fresh snowfall that had surprised everyone the night before, a rare and magical sight in this high desert country where winter usually meant cold winds and clear skies rather than the white blanket that now concealed deadly secrets in the rocky terrain north of town. She had been gathering pine branches for Christmas decorations, walking carefully along what she thought was solid ground near the creek bed, when the earth betrayed her. Now she was sinking slowly but steadily into what could only be quicksand. The wet ground beneath the snow turned treacherous by an underground spring that kept it liquid even in winter's grip. Lydia tried to pull herself free, but every movement only made her sink deeper, the cold mud now reaching her waist, seeping through her wool skirt and petticoats with an icy embrace that stole her breath. "Help!" she called out, though she knew the chances of anyone hearing her were slim. She had walked nearly 2 miles from town, following the creek into the foothills where the pine trees grew thick and tall. Her father had warned her not to go alone, but at 22 years old, Lydia had grown tired of always needing an escort, tired of being treated like a child who could not make her own decisions. Now, as the quicksand pulled her deeper and panic began to claw at her throat, she wished desperately that she had listened. The cold was becoming unbearable, her legs numb from the icy mixture of water and sand that held her captive. She tried to lean back. To distribute her weight, as she had once heard, was the way to escape such traps, but the snow-covered ground around her offered no purchase, breaking away in chunks whenever she tried to grab hold. Tears of frustration and fear froze on her cheeks as she sank another inch. Then another. "Help! Someone, please!" Her voice cracked with desperation, echoing off the rocky hillsides and disappearing into the vast Utah wilderness. That was when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats fast and getting closer. Hope surged in her chest as she craned her neck to see through the pine trees, and then he appeared, a figure on horseback moving with the kind of speed that spoke of either urgency or trouble. The rider pulled his horse to a sliding stop 20 feet away, snow spraying up in a white cloud, and Lydia found herself looking into the most startling blue eyes she had ever seen. "Do not move," the man commanded, swinging down from his saddle with fluid grace. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn leather chaps over dark trousers, a heavy coat open despite the cold, and a black hat pulled low over dark hair that curled at his collar. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with strong features and a jaw darkened by several days' worth of stubble. And there was something in the way he moved that spoke of competence and confidence. "I cannot move," Lydia gasped, her teeth chattering. "I am stuck. I am sinking." The cowboy's eyes swept the scene with practiced assessment, taking in the deceptive snow cover, the way the ground around her was already beginning to sag, and the desperate situation she was in. He moved carefully around the perimeter, testing the ground with each step, and Lydia could see his mind working, calculating angles and distances. "My name is Kane Iverson," he said, his voice calm and steady, as though he rescued women from quicksand every day. "I am going to get you out, but you need to stay as still as possible. Every movement makes you sink faster." "I know," Lydia whispered, fighting the urge to struggle against the sucking mud that now reached her lower ribs. "I have been trying not to move, but it keeps pulling me down." Kane moved back to his horse, a sturdy roan gelding that waited patiently, and began uncoiling the rope from his saddle. Lydia watched him work, noting the economical efficiency of his movements, the way his hands handled the rope with the ease of long practice. He was a working cowboy, she could tell, not one of the fancy ranchers' sons who came to town on Saturday nights in their clean shirts and polished boots. This man knew the land, knew its dangers, and knew how to survive them. I am going to throw you this rope, Kane said, fashioning a loop at one end. But first I need to find something to help distribute the pull. His eyes scanned the area and settled on a fallen pine branch several feet away, thick and sturdy, about 5 feet long. He moved to it quickly, testing its strength, then brought it back to where he could reach Lydia without getting too close to the unstable ground. When I throw this branch, you need to grab it and hold it horizontal across your chest, under your arms, he instructed. His blue eyes locked on hers with an intensity that somehow made her feel less alone. It will help spread your weight when I pull. Do you understand? Lydia nodded, not trusting her voice. The quicksand was now at her chest, and she could feel her heart pounding against her ribs, whether from fear or cold or both, she could not tell. She watched as Kane positioned himself carefully, testing the ground, then took the branch in both hands. Ready? He asked, and at her nod, he threw the branch with perfect aim. Lydia's cold fingers fumbled as she caught it, nearly dropping it in her panic, but she managed to grip the rough bark and pull it against her body, working it under her arms as he had instructed. The branch was solid and real, and just having something to hold on to made her feel a fraction less helpless. Good, Kane said, approval in his voice. Very good. Now I am going to throw the rope loop. Get it around you and the branch together if you can, or just around your body if you cannot. Either way, hold on tight to that branch. He swung the rope in a smooth arc, and the loop sailed through the air and landed perfectly around her shoulders. Lydia worked it down with one hand while clutching the branch with the other, managing to get it settled around her upper body. Kane immediately began to pull, but not with a sharp jerk that might hurt her or break the rope. Instead, he applied steady, even pressure, backing up slowly, using his body weight and strength to create a constant pull against the quicksand's grip. At first, nothing seemed to happen except that Lydia felt like she was being stretched between two opposing forces. The quicksand did not want to release its prize, and the rope bit into her shoulders, even through her coat. But Kane did not stop, did not give up, just kept pulling with that same steady pressure, his boots digging into the snow-covered ground, his powerful frame leaning into the effort. Try to wiggle your legs a little, he called. Small movements, just enough to let some water flow in around you. It will break the suction. Lydia did as he said, moving her legs as much as she dared, and suddenly she felt something give, a slight loosening of the terrible grip. Kane must have felt it too, because he immediately increased the pressure on the rope, pulling harder now, and inch by inch, Lydia began to rise from the quicksand's embrace. It was agonizingly slow, and the cold was making her muscles weak, but Kane never faltered. His face was set with concentration, his breath coming in white puffs in the winter air, and Lydia found herself focusing on him rather than her fear, on the determined line of his jaw, and the strength in his shoulders, and the way his eyes never left her, as though he could will her to safety through sheer force of determination. The quicksand released her waist, then her hips, and suddenly the suction broke entirely, and she was sliding forward across the snow-covered ground, still clutching the branch, the rope tight around her body. Kane pulled her a good 20 feet from the deadly trap before he stopped and came to her quickly, kneeling beside her in the snow. Are you hurt? He asked, his hands moving over her arms and shoulders, checking for injuries, his touch surprisingly gentle for such a large man. I do not think so, Lydia managed through chattering teeth. Just cold. So cold. Kane did not waste time with more questions. He could see she was shaking violently, her lips tinged with blue, her clothing soaked through with icy mud and water. Hypothermia was as deadly as the quicksand had been, and they were a long way from town. He scooped her up in his arms as though she weighed nothing, carried her to where a cluster of large boulders created a natural windbreak, and set her down gently. I need to get you warm, he said, already shrugging out of his heavy coat. Your clothes are soaked. You need to remove them. Lydia stared at him, shocked despite her desperate cold. I cannot possibly. You will die if you do not, Kane said bluntly, wrapping his coat around her shoulders anyway. I am not going to look, and I'm not going to touch you beyond what is necessary to keep you alive. But those wet clothes will kill you faster than the quicksand would have. Do you understand?" The harsh reality in his voice cut through her modesty and embarrassment. He was right. She knew he was right, but the thought of undressing in front of this stranger made her want to cry. Still, her fingers were so numb she could barely work the buttons of her own coat, and Kane, seeing her struggle, turned his back and began gathering dry wood from beneath the shelter of the pine trees, where the snow had not penetrated as deeply. "Tell me when you have the wet things off at the Rees," he said, his back rigid as he worked. "I have a blanket in my saddlebag you can wrap in." Lydia fumbled with her clothing, her fingers refusing to cooperate, tears of frustration joining the tears from cold that already streaked her face. She managed to remove her soaked coat and the outer layers of her dress, but her fingers simply would not work well enough to deal with the complicated fastenings of her corset and petticoats. Everything was wet, clinging to her skin, stealing her warmth with every passing second. "I cannot do it," she finally admitted, her voice small and ashamed. "My hands, they will not work." Kane was silent for a moment, and she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I am going to help you," he said quietly. "I give you my word as a gentleman that I will not look at anything I do not need to see, and I will not speak of this to anyone. Your reputation will be safe, but you need to let me help, or you will not survive." "Please," Lydia whispered, because she truly had no choice, and she was so cold that the world was starting to seem fuzzy and distant. Kane turned back to her, and true to his word, his eyes stayed on his hands and on the fastenings he was working to undo, never straying to anything else. His fingers were deft despite their size, clearly familiar with buttons and laces, and he worked quickly but carefully, removing each soaked layer and immediately covering her with his coat or the blanket he retrieved from his saddle. He left her chemise on, though it was damp, because it provided at least a layer between her and complete nakedness, and he seemed to understand that she needed that small dignity. Once she was wrapped in the blanket with his coat over top, Kane finally allowed himself to meet her eyes. "Better?" he asked. Lydia nodded, though she was still shaking so hard her teeth rattled together. Kane had already kindled a small fire in the shelter of the rocks, coaxing it to life with the dry tinder he carried in a waterproof pouch, and now he built it up carefully until heat began to radiate outward. He positioned Lydia as close to the flames as was safe, then went about spreading her wet clothing on the rocks around the fire to dry. "What were you doing out here alone?" he asked as he worked, his tone conversational, as though they were sitting in a parlor rather than huddled in the wilderness with her wearing nothing but a blanket. "Gathering pine branches," Lydia said, grateful for the distraction of talking. "For Christmas. We always decorate the house, and I wanted to surprise my father." "Your father is going to have my hide if he finds out about this," Kane observed, checking the fire and adding another piece of wood. "He does not need to know," Lydia said quickly. "I mean, about the clothes. You can just tell him you found me stuck and pulled me out." Kane glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "You want me to lie to your father?" "I want you to protect my reputation," Lydia corrected. "If anyone in town finds out that I was undressed in front of a man, even under these circumstances, I will be ruined. You know how people talk." Kane was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I do know," he finally said, "and I already gave you my word. No one will hear anything from me." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time Lydia saw something other than practical concern in his eyes. "What is your name?" "I have told you mine, but I do not know yours." "Lydia Foster," she said, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "My father owns the general store in St. George." "Foster," Kane repeated, nodding. "I have been in there a few times. Your father is a fair man. Does not try to cheat folks like some storekeepers do." "He believes in honest dealing," Lydia said, pride warming her voice. "He says a man's word should mean something." "Seems like his daughter takes after him rare," Kane said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Heading out alone into the wilderness to gather pine branches, stubborn enough to keep fighting even when the quicksand had you half swallowed. That takes a particular kind of courage." Lydia felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. Or a particular kind of foolishness. My father warned me not to go alone. Maybe a bit of both, Kane agreed. But I'm glad for your foolishness today, since it means I got to meet you. The words hung in the air between them, more intimate than they had any right to be given the circumstances, and Lydia found herself studying this man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. There was something about him that drew her attention, something beyond his obvious physical strength and competence. He had kind eyes, she realized, despite the hardness that frontier life had carved into his features. And he had been nothing but respectful, even gentle, when he could have taken advantage of her vulnerable situation. "Do you work around here?" she asked, wanting to know more about him. "I do not remember seeing you in town before." "I work at the Running Eye Ranch, about 5 miles north of St. George," Kane said. "I've only been there since September. Before that, I was up in Montana, but the winters there are brutal. And when I heard about work down here in Utah, I decided to come south." "What brought you out this way today?" Lydia asked. "I thought most of the ranch land was to the east of town." Kane's expression changed, became more serious. "One of our cows went missing, a pregnant heifer that was close to calving. The boss was worried she had wandered off to drop her calf somewhere secluded, so he sent me to track her. I found her about a mile back, already had her baby, both doing fine. I was heading back to the ranch when I heard you calling for help." "Providence," Lydia murmured, thinking how close she had come to dying alone in that terrible trap if Kane had not been there. "Maybe," Kane said. "Or maybe just luck. Either way, I'm grateful I was in the right place at the right time." They fell into comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them, and Lydia realized with some surprise that her shaking had stopped. She was warming up, the terrible ice-deep cold gradually releasing its grip on her bones. Her clothes were steaming gently on the rocks, and she tried not to think about how long it would take them to dry or what she would do in the meantime. Kane seemed to sense her thoughts. "It will be a while before those are dry enough to wear," he said, "and the sun will be setting in a few hours. I should ride into town, bring back some dry clothes and maybe a wagon to take you home. Can you stay here and keep the fire going while I go?" Panic fluttered in Lydia's chest at the thought of being left alone, even though she knew it was the practical solution. "How long will you be gone?" 2 hours, maybe 3, Kane said. "I will ride fast. You will be safe here, and the fire will keep you warm. Just keep adding wood to it. Do not let it die down." Lydia nodded, though she did not like it. But what choice did she have? She certainly could not ride into town wearing nothing but a blanket, and Kane could not carry her all that way on horseback. "All right," she agreed, "but please hurry." Kane stood, hesitated, then crouched down beside her and looked directly into her eyes. "I will be back," he said firmly. "I give you my word, Lydia Foster, I will not leave you out here." The way he said her name, with that rough gentleness in his voice, made something flutter in Lydia's chest that had nothing to do with fear or cold. She found herself nodding, trusting him in a way that seemed foolish given that she had met him less than an hour ago, yet somehow felt completely natural. Kane made sure she had plenty of wood within reach, checked the fire one more time, then swung up into his saddle. He looked down at her, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then he touched his fingers to the brim in a small salute and rode off, his horse's hooves throwing up clouds of snow as they disappeared into the pine trees. Lydia sat alone by the fire, wrapped in a stranger's coat and blanket, and wondered what on earth she was going to tell her father. The wait seemed endless, though the sun's position in the sky told Lydia it had only been about 2 hours when she heard the sound of wagon wheels and multiple horses approaching. She tensed, suddenly worried that Kane had brought a crowd. But when the wagon came into view, she saw only Kane himself driving with his horse tied to the back, and beside him on the bench seat was a woman Lydia recognized as Mrs. Sarah Chen, one of the Chinese immigrants who ran a laundry service in town. Relief flooded through Lydia as the wagon pulled to a stop. Mrs. Chen climbed down with surprising agility for her age, carrying a bundle of clothes, her weathered face creased with concern. "Miss Foster," she said in her accented English, "Mr. Iverson tells me you have accident, need help. I bring clean, dry clothes. You come behind wagon, I help you dress, yes?" Lydia could have cried with gratitude. Kane had thought to bring another woman, had understood that she would need help getting dressed, and had found someone who would be discreet. Mrs. Chen was known for her quiet nature and her refusal to participate in town gossip, which made her the perfect choice. "Thank you," Lydia managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." Kane turned his back again as Mrs. Chen helped Lydia behind the wagon, where the boards provided at least some privacy from the surrounding wilderness. The clothes Mrs. Chen had brought were simple but clean. A plain brown dress and underthings that were slightly too large but far better than nothing. Mrs. Chen helped her with all the complicated fastenings, making sympathetic noises over Lydia's still cold skin and the mud that had dried in her hair. "You very lucky Mr. Iverson find you," Mrs. Chen said as she worked. "Very lucky. Quicksand very dangerous. Kill you fast. He brave man, good man. He come to laundry very worried, need help quick, but must protect your honor. I tell him I come. No question." "He is a good man," Lydia agreed softly, surprised by how much she meant it. A man she had just met, and already she felt she knew something essential about his character. When she was finally dressed, Mrs. Chen declared her presentable and helped her around to the front of the wagon. Kane had kept his back turned the entire time, feeding the horse from a bag of oats, and only turned when Mrs. Chen called to him. "Miss Foster is ready now," Mrs. Chen announced. "We take her home, yes?" "Yes," Kane agreed, and came to help Lydia up onto the wagon bench. His hands were strong and steady at her waist, lifting her easily, and Lydia found herself very aware of the warmth of his touch even through the layers of fabric. The ride back to St. George was slow, the wagon unable to navigate the rough terrain as quickly as a horse could have, and the sun was setting by the time they reached the outskirts of town. Kane had been quiet during the journey, letting Mrs. Chen do most of the talking, and Lydia had found herself stealing glances at his profile as he drove, wondering what he was thinking. When they pulled up in front of the general store, Lydia's father burst out the door, his face pale with worry. "Lydia, where have you been? I have been worried sick." "I am sorry, Father," Lydia said as Kane helped her down from the wagon. "I went to gather pine branches and I got into some trouble, but Mr. Iverson helped me." "Trouble?" Her father's eyes sharpened, taking in her borrowed clothes and damp hair. "What kind of trouble?" "She fell through some snow into unstable ground, sir," Kane said, his voice calm and respectful. "Got stuck pretty good. I happened to be tracking a missing cow and heard her calling for help. Managed to pull her free, but her clothes got wet and muddy in the process. So I rode back to town and asked Mrs. Chen to bring some dry things. Your daughter is unhurt, just cold and shaken." It was the truth, Lydia noted, just not all of the truth. There was no mention of the quicksand specifically, no mention of hypothermia or the need to remove wet clothing. Kane had kept his promise to protect her reputation while still being honest with her father. Mr. Foster looked between Kane and his daughter, his merchant's eyes missing nothing, but he seemed satisfied with the explanation. "I owe you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Iverson," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for helping my daughter." Kane shook his hand firmly. "No debt, sir. Anyone would have done the same." "Not everyone would have thought to protect her reputation by bringing Mrs. Chen," Mr. Foster said shrewdly. "That shows both quick thinking and good character. You must let me reward you somehow. Perhaps a discount at the store or—" "No reward necessary," Kane interrupted gently. "Just knowing Miss Foster is safe is enough." Mr. Foster studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, but you are always welcome in my store, Mr. Iverson, and at my table. Any man who helps my daughter is a friend to this family." Kane touched his hat brim in acknowledgement. "I appreciate that, sir. Now, if you will excuse me, I should get Mrs. Chen back to her laundry and return this wagon to the livery." "Of course," Mr. Foster agreed, already ushering Lydia toward the door. "Lydia, let us get you inside and warmed up properly." Lydia allowed herself to be led inside, but she turned back at the last moment to catch Kane's eye. He was watching her, she realized, his expression unreadable in the fading light, and for a moment their gazes locked and held. Then Mrs. Chen said something to him and he turned away, climbing back onto the wagon bench, and Lydia was pulled inside by her father's insistent hand on her arm. That night, wrapped in her own bed with a hot brick at her feet, and her father fussing over her like she was a child again, Lydia found her thoughts returning again and again to Kane Iverson, to the calm steadiness in his voice when he promised to save her, to the careful way he had protected her modesty even when time was critical, to the warmth in his eyes when he said he was glad to have met her. She had met dozens of men in her life, had been courted by several of them, but none had ever made her feel the way she felt when Kane looked at her, as though she was someone worth seeing, worth saving, worth remembering. She wondered if she would ever see him again. This cowboy, who had appeared like something out of a story to pull her from the Quicksand's deadly embrace. St. George was not a large town, but the Running Eye Ranch was 5 miles away, and working cowboys did not often have reason to come into town except on Saturday nights when they got paid. Still, she found herself hoping, found herself already planning reasons she might need to be in certain places at certain times, just in case their paths should cross again. She fell asleep thinking of blue eyes and strong hands and a voice that promised safety, and did not notice the way her father stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her with a thoughtful expression on his face, before quietly closing the door and leaving her to her dreams. Kane returned the wagon to the livery and made sure Mrs. Chen was safely back at her laundry before finally heading back toward the ranch. It was full dark now, the stars brilliant overhead in the clear winter sky, and his horse knew the way home even without much guidance. Kane let his mind wander as they traveled, back to the moment when he had crested that rise and heard a woman's voice calling for help. He had been prepared for many things, a fall, an injury, maybe even a confrontation with outlaws or hostile Indians, though both were rare this close to town. What he had not been prepared for was to find a woman trapped in quicksand, her face pale with cold and fear, her dark eyes wide with desperation, or for the way something in his chest had twisted at the sight of her, an immediate and powerful need to help, to save, to protect. Lydia Foster. He turned the name over in his mind, liking the sound of it, the way it had felt on his tongue when he spoke it aloud. She was beautiful. There was no denying that, with her dark hair and fine features and the kind of curves that even wet, muddy clothes could not hide. But it was more than beauty that had caught his attention. It was the courage in her eyes, the way she had kept fighting even when the quicksand was winning, the trust she had placed in him when he was a complete stranger, and the dignity with which she had handled an incredibly embarrassing and vulnerable situation. He had known in that moment when he was helping her remove her wet clothes with his eyes carefully averted that he was in danger of losing his heart. There was something about her that called to him, something beyond physical attraction, though that was certainly present too. It was a recognition, a sense of rightness, as though some part of him had been waiting for her without even knowing it. But Kane was a practical man, and he knew the reality of his situation. He was a cowboy, a drifter, who owned nothing but his horse, his saddle, and the clothes on his back. Lydia Foster was a merchant's daughter, a respectable young woman from a good family with prospects far better than anything he could offer. Her father had been polite, even grateful, but Kane had not missed the assessing look in the older man's eyes, the way he had measured Kane and found him wanting for all that he had offered thanks and friendship. No, Kane told himself as the lights of the ranch house came into view. No, it was better to keep his distance, to treasure the memory of this day, but not to pursue anything more. Lydia Foster deserved better than a 31-year-old cowboy with no prospects and a past full of hard living and harder choices. She deserved someone who could give her a home, stability, a future worth having. Even if the thought of never seeing her again made something in his chest ache in a way he had never experienced before. December in St. George passed slowly for Lydia, each day blending into the next in a routine that had once been comforting but now felt stifling. She helped her father in the store, measuring out flour and sugar, cutting cloth, tallying accounts in the ledger with her neat, careful handwriting. She attended church on Sundays, helped with the Christmas preparations, visited with the other young women in town, and listened to them chatter about beaux and parties and who might propose to whom. but her mind kept wandering to a pair of blue eyes and a voice that had promised to save her. She found herself watching the store entrance, her heart jumping every time the bell above the door rang, hoping to see Kane Iverson walk in. But days became weeks, and he never appeared. Christmas came and went. A quiet affair with her father giving her a new wool shawl and a book of poetry, and Lydia trying to feel grateful rather than restless. The new year of 1882 arrived with cold winds and clear skies. The unusual snowfall from December long since melted away, leaving the high desert landscape brown and stark under the winter sun. It was mid-January when her father finally mentioned Kane at dinner one evening, his tone carefully casual. "That young man who helped you, Mr. Iverson, he has not come into the store since that day. I expected he might take me up on my offer of friendship." Lydia kept her eyes on her plate, not trusting her voice. "Perhaps he's too busy with ranch work. Winter is a difficult time for cattle." "Perhaps," her father agreed, but there was something in his tone that made Lydia look up. Her father was watching her with the shrewd expression he usually reserved for assessing a customer's willingness to pay a certain price. "Or perhaps he is staying away because he thinks he should," her father said slowly. "A man like that, he knows his place in the world, knows that a merchant's daughter is above his station." "Father," Lydia began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. I have been thinking about Mr. Iverson quite a bit these past weeks, and I have come to some conclusions. He is a good man, Lydia. I could see that in the way he handled a difficult situation. He is honest, hardworking, and he treated you with respect when he could have behaved very differently. Those qualities matter to me more than money or social standing." Lydia felt her heart begin to beat faster. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that if you wish to see him again, I would not object," her father said carefully. "And if he were to come calling, I would receive him. But he does not know that, does he? He thinks he saved your life, and then that was the end of it. He thinks he should stay away." "I do not even know if he wants to see me," Lydia said quietly. "He has not tried to visit or send word. Perhaps he has no interest in me at all beyond what happened that day." Her father snorted. "I may be getting old, Lydia, but I am not blind. That young man looked at you the way I used to look at your mother, God rest her soul. He wants to see you. He just thinks he should not." Hope bloomed in Lydia's chest, fragile and frightening. "Even if that is true, what can I do? I cannot go riding out to the ranch. That would be completely inappropriate." "No, you cannot," her father agreed. "But I can find a reason to conduct some business with the Running Eye Ranch, and I can take my daughter along to help with the inventory. There would be nothing inappropriate about that." Lydia stared at her father, wondering when he had become so devious. "You would do that? For your happiness? Yes?" Her father reached across the table to take her hand. "You are all I have left of your mother, Lydia. I want to see you settled and happy, but more than that, I want to see you with someone who values you, who will treat you well. If Mr. Iverson is that man, then I will give him a chance to prove it." 2 days later, Lydia found herself sitting beside her father on the buckboard as they drove north out of St. George toward the Running Eye Ranch. Her father had sent word ahead that he wished to discuss a bulk supply order for the ranch, which was a real enough request that no one would question it. And the ranch foreman had sent back a note saying they would be welcome any afternoon this week. Lydia had agonized over what to wear, finally settling on her best blue dress, the one that brought out the color of her eyes, with her good coat over top and her hair carefully arranged under her bonnet. She felt nervous in a way she had not felt in years, her stomach fluttering with anticipation and fear in equal measure. What if Kane did not want to see her? What if he thought she was chasing him inappropriately? What if whatever she had felt between them that day had been entirely one-sided, a product of danger and fear rather than any real connection? The Running Eye Ranch came into view as they rounded a bend in the road. A sprawling collection of buildings, including a large barn, several outbuildings, corrals, and a ranch house that looked sturdy and well-maintained. Cattle dotted the hillsides, the winter-brown landscape broken up by patches of sagebrush and the occasional stubborn clump of grass. As they pulled into the ranch yard, several men emerged from the barn, curiosity on their faces at the arrival of visitors. Lydia scanned them quickly, her heart sinking when she did not see Kane among them. Then her father was climbing down from the buckboard and greeting the ranch foreman, a grizzled man named Tom Harrison, who had been running the ranch for the owner, a wealthy businessman who lived in Salt Lake City. "Mr. Foster, welcome," Harrison said, shaking her father's hand. "And Miss Foster, a pleasure. Please come inside where it is warmer and we can discuss your business." They followed Harrison into the ranch house, which was surprisingly comfortable inside, with a fire crackling in the large stone fireplace and furniture that looked lived in but well cared for. Harrison's wife, a plump, cheerful woman named Ruth, appeared with coffee and slices of apple cake, fussing over them in the way of frontier women who did not often have the chance to entertain. Lydia sat quietly while her father and Harrison discussed quantities of flour, sugar, coffee, and other supplies that the ranch would need over the coming months. She sipped her coffee and tried not to obviously look around for any sign of Kane, though her ears were straining for the sound of his voice. It was not until the business discussion was winding down that Harrison casually mentioned, "If you want to see the stock we are running, Miss Foster, I can have one of the boys show you around. Might be educational, if you are interested in ranch operations." "I would like that very much," Lydia said, perhaps a bit too quickly, and saw Harrison smile slightly, as though he understood more than he was letting on. Harrison stepped out onto the porch and called toward the barn, "Iverson, come up here a minute, would you?" Lydia's heart jumped into her throat as she saw Kane emerge from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked much as she remembered, though perhaps a bit more worn, as though he had not been sleeping well. He walked toward the house with easy, long-legged strides, and then he saw her through the open door and stopped dead, surprise flickering across his face. "Iverson, this is Miss Foster and her father," Harrison said, though his tone suggested he knew perfectly well they had met before. "Mr. Foster is arranging a supply order with us, and I thought Miss Foster might like to see some of the ranch while they finish up the details. Could you show her around? Just the barn and the near corrals. Keep it proper." Kane's eyes met Lydia's, and she saw a question in them, an uncertainty that matched her own. But he touched his hat brim politely and said, "Be happy to, boss. Miss Foster, if you would follow me." Lydia stood, very aware of her father watching with a slight smile, and of Mrs. Harrison looking delighted at the prospect of a romance unfolding on her ranch. She followed Kane out into the winter sunlight, and for several moments they walked in silence toward the barn, the distance between them feeling vast despite being only a few feet. "I did not know you would be here," Kane finally said, his voice low. "Your father sent word about a supply order, but there was no mention of you." "I think my father might have planned this," Lydia admitted. "He told me a few days ago that if I wanted to see you again, he would arrange it." Kane stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Did you want to see me again?" Lydia made herself meet his eyes, made herself be as brave as she had been that day in the quicksand. "Yes," she said simply. "I have thought about you every day since you saved me. I kept hoping you would come into the store, but you never did." "I wanted to," Kane said, and the rawness in his voice made something in Lydia's chest tighten. "God, Lydia, I wanted to, but I did not think I had any right. You are a merchant's daughter, respectable and educated, with a future ahead of you. I am just a cowboy with no prospects and nothing to offer." "You saved my life," Lydia said fiercely. "You were kind and respectful and honorable when you could have been otherwise. You protected my reputation and cared about my welfare. Those things matter to me, Kane. They matter more than money or prospects." Kane looked at her for a long moment, something vulnerable and hopeful in his blue eyes. "Your father, he knows you are here with me right now. He approves." "He orchestrated it," Lydia said with a small smile. "He told me that he could see in the way you looked at me that day that you cared, and that if you wanted to court me, he would not object." "Court you," Kane repeated, as though testing the words. "A month ago I was a stranger, and now I'm supposed to court you?" "A month ago you pulled me out of Quicksand and saved my life," Lydia corrected. "That seems like a fairly significant way to meet someone. And I think we both felt something that day. Something beyond just the circumstances, or am I wrong about that? No, Kane said quietly. You are not wrong. I felt it too. I have been trying not to feel it, trying to convince myself it was just the danger and the drama of the situation, but it does not go away. Every time I close my eyes, I see you. Every time I hear a woman's voice, I hope it is yours. I have been miserable, Lydia, knowing I met you and then having to stay away. Lydia felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were happy tears, relief and joy flooding through her. Then do not stay away, she said. Court me, come visit, let us see if what we felt that day can grow into something more. Kane looked at her, and slowly, wondrously, a smile spread across his face, transforming his stern features into something warm and open. I would like that very much, he said, if your father truly does not object, and if you are certain this is what you want. I am certain, Lydia said, and on impulse she reached out and took his hand. Kane's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and for a moment they just stood there in the ranch yard holding hands like children, smiling at each other like fools. Then Kane seemed to remember where they were and gently released her hand, though the warmth in his eyes did not dim. I suppose I should actually show you around the ranch, he said, since that is supposedly why we are out here. Lydia laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. I suppose you should. Kane led her through the barn, showing her the stalls where the horses were kept, the feed room, the tack room with its rows of saddles and bridles. He introduced her to the ranch dogs who wagged their tails enthusiastically, and to several of the horses, including his own roan gelding, who nuzzled her hand looking for treats. This is Red, Kane said, stroking the horse's neck affectionately. He is a good horse, steady and smart. He is the one who carried me to you that day. Lydia patted Red's shoulder, feeling a rush of gratitude toward the animal. Then I am very fond of Red, she said seriously, and Kane smiled. They walked through the corrals where Kane pointed out some of the cattle, explaining the ranch's breeding program and the challenges of raising cattle in the high desert climate. Lydia found herself fascinated not so much by the information itself, though it was interesting, but by the way Kane's face lit up when he talked about his work, the pride and competence in his voice. This was a man who knew what he was doing, who was good at his job, who took satisfaction in a hard day's work well done. It was attractive in a way that silk shirts and smooth words had never been when the merchant's sons from town tried to court her. Eventually, they made their way back to the ranch house, where they found Lydia's father and Harrison apparently deep in conversation, though Lydia suspected they had been watching out the window the entire time. Her father stood when they entered, his eyes moving between Lydia's flushed, happy face and Kane's unguarded smile. Ready to head back, daughter? Her father asked, though his tone was mild. Yes, father, Lydia said. Then, emboldened by Kane's presence beside her, she added, Mr. Iverson has agreed to come calling, if that is acceptable to you. Her father nodded, as though this was exactly what he had expected. Very acceptable. Mr. Iverson, you are welcome at our home any evening you can spare the time. We typically have dinner around 6, but if your work keeps you late, come when you can. Thank you, sir, Kane said, and Lydia heard the gratitude and disbelief in his voice. I will likely not be able to come until Saturday evenings, as those are generally my only free time, but I will be there this Saturday if that suits. It suits very well, Mr. Foster said, and extended his hand to Kane. Take care of my daughter, Mr. Iverson. She's all I have. I will guard her with my life, sir, Kane said, and Lydia knew he meant it literally. The ride back to St. George seemed to pass in a blur, Lydia barely noticing the landscape as she replayed every word, every look, every moment of her conversation with Kane. Her father let her dream in peace, not speaking except to occasionally click at the horses, and when they finally pulled up in front of their house above the store, he turned to her with a gentle smile. Your mother would have liked him, he said quietly. She always said the measure of a man was not in what he owned, but in what he did when it mattered. That young man proved his measure the day he saved you. I know, Lydia said softly, I feel like the luckiest woman alive, Father. Not just because he saved me, but because I got to meet him at all. Then I will leave you to your happiness, her father said. But Lydia, remember that courtship is just the beginning. Take your time. Get to know him. Make sure this feeling is real and lasting. There is no rush. Lydia nodded, understanding the wisdom in her father's words, even as her heart wanted to race ahead. She climbed down from the buckboard and went inside, already counting the days until Saturday. The days until Saturday seemed to crawl by with agonizing slowness, each hour stretching longer than the last. Lydia threw herself into preparations, cleaning the house until it shone, planning a menu for dinner that would show off her cooking skills without seeming like she was trying too hard. She washed her hair twice, pressed her best dress 3 times, and drove her father to distraction with her nervous energy. When Saturday finally arrived, Lydia was a bundle of nerves, checking her reflection in the mirror every few minutes, adjusting her hair, smoothing down her dress. Her father watched her with patient amusement, finally telling her at 5:30 that she looked beautiful, and if she fussed anymore, she was going to wear a hole in the floor from pacing. Kane arrived at 6 o'clock exactly, riding red, and wearing what were clearly his best clothes, a clean shirt and trousers, his boots polished, his hair damp from a recent washing and curling slightly at his collar. He carried a small bouquet of winter greenery tied with a ribbon, which he presented to Lydia with an endearing awkwardness that made her heart melt. "I could not find flowers," he said apologetically, "but I thought these were pretty." "They are perfect," Lydia assured him, taking the greenery and arranging it in a vase with more care than the simple branches probably warranted. Dinner was a success. The roast beef tender and flavorful, the potatoes and vegetables cooked just right, the apple pie for dessert still warm from the oven. But Lydia barely tasted any of it, too aware of Kane sitting across from her, of the way his eyes kept finding hers, of the small smiles he gave her when her father was not looking. Her father kept the conversation flowing, asking Kane about his background, his family, his plans for the future. Kane answered honestly, explaining that he had grown up in Wyoming, the youngest of 5 children on a small ranch that could not support all of them. He had left home at 18 to make his own way, working on various ranches across the West, learning the trade, saving what money he could. "I had thought to maybe buy my own land someday," Kane admitted. "A small place, nothing fancy, but enough to run a few head of cattle to build something of my own. But land is expensive, and it will take years to save enough." "A worthy goal," Mr. Foster said approvingly. "A man should have something to work toward, something to build." After dinner, Lydia and Kane sat in the parlor while her father discreetly busied himself with paperwork in his study, leaving the door open for propriety's sake but giving them the illusion of privacy. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes, their fears, their dreams. Lydia told Kane about her mother, who had died when Lydia was 15. About the pain of that loss and the way it had changed her relationship with her father, drawing them closer even as it left a permanent ache in her heart. Kane told her about the loneliness of drifting from place to place, always the outsider, never quite belonging, and the way he had started to wonder if he would spend his whole life alone. "And then I heard you calling for help," Kane said quietly, "and everything changed. I know it sounds foolish, like something out of a dime novel, but it felt like fate, like I was meant to be there, meant to find you." "It does not sound foolish," Lydia assured him. "I felt it too. When you appeared, it was like you brought more than just rescue. It was like you brought hope." Kane reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from hard work, his grip warm and gentle, and Lydia felt a thrill run through her at the contact. "I want to do this right," Kane said. "I want to court you properly, take the time to let you get to know me, let your father see that I'm worthy of you. But I also want you to know that I'm already certain. From that first moment, I have been certain." "Certain of what?" Lydia whispered, though she thought she knew. "That you are who I have been waiting for," Kane said simply. "That if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve." Lydia felt tears gather in her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice, by the way he was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I am certain too," she managed. "But my father is right. We should take our time, do this properly. I do not want anyone to be able to say we rushed into anything, and I do not want us to have any doubts." "No doubts," Kane agreed. "We will do this right." And they did. Over the following weeks and months, Kane became a regular fixture at the Foster home, arriving every Saturday evening for dinner, staying late into the night talking with Lydia while her father chaperoned from a discreet distance. On Sundays, if the weather was good, Kane would come to town and they would go for walks, properly accompanied by her father or one of the other respectable women in town, talking and laughing and learning more about each other with every passing day. Kane told her about his love of horses, the way he could read their moods and emotions, the satisfaction he felt when he could gentle a difficult animal or heal a sick one. Lydia told him about her dreams of having a real home, a place that was hers, where she could put down roots and build something lasting. They discovered shared values in honesty and hard work, shared humor in the absurdities of life, and a shared vulnerability that made them able to be truthful with each other in ways neither had been with anyone else. In March, when the desert began to bloom with wildflowers and the weather turned warm, Kane asked Mr. Foster for permission to take Lydia on a picnic, just the two of them, without a chaperone. It was a bold request, pushing the boundaries of propriety, but Mr. Foster had been watching the two of them for 3 months now and had seen enough to trust them. "You may go," he said, "but I expect you back before dark, and if there is any gossip, any hint of impropriety, I will have your hide, Mr. Iverson." "Understood, sir," Kane said seriously. "You have my word, nothing will happen that should not." They rode out together on a Sunday afternoon, Lydia riding a gentle mare that Kane had borrowed from the ranch, Kane on red, saddlebags packed with food and a blanket. They rode north, away from town, into the red rock country that made southern Utah famous, the landscape blazing with color under the spring sun. Kane led them to a small canyon he had found during his explorations, a hidden place where a spring created a small pool of clear water surrounded by cottonwood trees and soft grass. It was beautiful and private, and Lydia felt her breath catch at the perfection of it. They spread the blanket in the shade of the trees and unpacked the food, but neither of them was very hungry. There was a tension in the air between them now, a awareness that they were truly alone together for the first time since that day in December, and that the careful distance they had been maintaining for propriety's sake no longer had to be preserved quite so strictly. "Lydia," Kane said, setting down the sandwich he had been attempting to eat, "there is something I need to ask you." Lydia's heart began to pound. "What is it?" Kane shifted, moving closer to her on the blanket, and took both of her hands in his. "I know we have only been courting for 3 months, and by most standards that is not very long, but I feel like I have known you forever, like you are a part of me that was missing and now I have found it. I love you, Lydia Foster. I love your kindness and your courage and your laugh and the way you look at me like I am someone special, even though I am just a cowboy. I love everything about you, and I do not want to wait any longer to tell you that." Tears were streaming down Lydia's face, but she was smiling, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I love you too," she said. "I have loved you since you appeared out of nowhere to save me, since you treated me with such kindness and respect, since you made me feel safe even when I was terrified. I love you, Kane Iverson, and I do not care that you are just a cowboy. You are everything I want." Kane let out a shaky breath, and she could see his own eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Then will you marry me? I know I do not have much to offer, and it might be years before I can afford to buy land, and you would have to live in a small house on the ranch where I would be working long hours for not much pay. But I would love you with everything I have, and I would spend every day trying to give you the life you deserve. Will you marry me, Lydia?" "Yes," Lydia said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I do not care about land or big houses or money. I care about you, about building a life with you, about being your wife. Yes, I will marry you." Kane pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, and Lydia felt like she had finally come home. They sat there for a long time, wrapped in each other's embrace, talking about their future, their dreams, making plans even though they knew life rarely went according to plan. When Kane finally kissed her, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Lydia felt like her heart was going to explode with happiness. This was what she had been waiting for, this feeling of rightness, of belonging, of being exactly where she was meant to be with exactly who she was meant to be with. They returned to town before dark, as promised, riding side by side with hands linked whenever the trail allowed. Mr. Foster took one look at their glowing faces and laughed. "I take it congratulations are in order," he asked. "If you will give your blessing, sir," Kane said. "I have asked Lydia to marry me, and she has accepted, but I will not go forward without your approval." Mr. Foster studied them both for a long moment, then smiled. "You have my blessing, Mr. Iverson. Or should I call you Kane, since you are about to become my son-in-law?" "Kane would be an honor, sir," Kane said, relief and joy evident in his voice. They were married in June, a small ceremony in the church in St. George with the few close friends and family they had in the area. Lydia wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in tissue paper all these years, and Kane wore a new suit that he had saved for months to afford. Mr. Foster walked Lydia down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and when he placed her hand in Kane's, he whispered, "Take care of her, son." "With my life," Kane promised, and Lydia knew he meant it. The ranch foreman, Mr. Harrison, had surprised them by offering them a small cabin on the ranch property to live in, a 2-room affair that was old but sturdy, and Lydia had spent the weeks before the wedding fixing it up, making curtains, scrubbing floors, turning it into a home. It was not much, but it was theirs. And when Kane carried her over the threshold on their wedding night, Lydia felt like the richest woman in the world. Their first year of marriage was not easy. Money was tight, with Kane's cowboy wages barely enough to cover their basic needs, and Lydia missed the comfort and security of living above her father's store. The cabin was cold in winter and hot in summer, and there were times when she wondered if she had made a mistake, giving up her comfortable life for this hard existence on the ranch. But then Kane would come home after a long day of work, his face lighting up when he saw her, and he would pull her into his arms and tell her how much he loved her, how grateful he was to have her, and all of Lydia's doubts would melt away. This was where she belonged, with this man who loved her, building a life together one day at a time. In their second year of marriage, Lydia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure, knowing how dangerous childbirth could be, especially out here in the wilderness, far from doctors and hospitals. But Lydia was strong and healthy, and when their son was born on a cold January night in 1884 with only Kane and the rancher's wife to help her, she came through the ordeal tired but triumphant. They named him Matthew after Kane's father, and from the moment Kane held his son for the first time, Lydia could see that something in him had shifted, had settled. He was a father now, with responsibilities and a reason to build something lasting, and the determination in his eyes when he looked at their baby told Lydia that nothing would stop him from giving their son the best life possible. Kane began saving every penny he could spare, working extra jobs when they were available, and slowly, painfully slowly, their savings began to grow. Mr. Foster helped when he could, giving them small gifts of money or supplies, and Lydia took in sewing to contribute what she could. When Matthew was 2 years old, a piece of land came up for sale, 100 acres of rough desert terrain with a small creek running through it, about 3 miles from the Running Eye Ranch. It was not prime land, not by any stretch, but it was affordable, and it had water, which was the most important thing. Kane spent weeks agonizing over whether they could afford it, whether it was a wise investment, but in the end, with Mr. Foster's help in securing a loan from the bank, they bought it. Their own land, their own piece of the earth. It felt like a miracle. Kane continued to work at the Running Eye Ranch while he built their new home on their own land, working every spare moment he had. Lydia helped when she could, holding boards while he hammered, mixing mortar for the stone foundation, all while keeping an eye on Matthew, who toddled around getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of a 2-year-old. The house they built was small, just 3 rooms, but it was solid and well made. And when they finally moved in, Lydia cried with happiness. This was theirs, truly theirs, built with their own hands and their own labor and their own dreams. Kane started building up their herd slowly, buying a few head of cattle at a time when he could afford it, raising them on the rough desert grass and the water from their creek. It was hard work, backbreaking and endless, and there were times when Lydia wondered if they would ever get ahead or if they would always be struggling just to survive. But Kane never gave up, and his determination was contagious. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word, and slowly, gradually, their small ranch began to prosper. Their herd grew, their savings grew, and when Lydia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, in 1886, they felt wealthy beyond measure despite having little money in the bank. The years passed, bringing both hardships and joys. There were droughts that killed cattle and made life desperate, and winters that were brutal in their cold. There were losses and disappointments, times when the bank loan payment seemed impossible, and they did not know how they would make it through another month. But there were also good years, years when the cattle thrived, and the sales were strong, and they could afford little luxuries like new dresses for Lydia and proper shoes for the children. There were evenings spent on their porch watching the sun set over the red rocks, with Matthew and Sarah playing at their feet, and Kane's arm around Lydia's shoulders. And in those moments, Lydia felt like the luckiest woman alive. By 1890, their ranch had grown to 300 acres, their herd to over 100 head of cattle, and they had added 2 more rooms to their house to accommodate their growing family. Matthew was 6 now, already showing signs of becoming a capable rancher like his father, and Sarah was 4, bright and curious and full of energy. When Lydia gave birth to their third child, another son they named James, Kane held her hand through the labor and told her how much he loved her, how proud he was of the life they had built together. And Lydia, looking at her husband's weathered face and seeing the love and devotion in his eyes, knew that every hardship had been worth it. Mr. Foster, who was getting older now but still ran his store with the same dedication he always had, visited often, delighting in his grandchildren and the success his daughter and son-in-law had built. He told anyone who would listen about the day Kane Iverson had saved his daughter's life and how he had known from that first moment that Kane was someone special. "It takes a certain kind of man to stay calm in a crisis," Mr. Foster would say, "and it takes a certain kind of man to recognize when he has found something worth holding on to. Kane is both kinds of man, and my daughter is lucky to have him." But Kane always said he was the lucky one, that Lydia had taken a chance on a cowboy with nothing but a dream and had helped him turn that dream into reality. He would look at their ranch, at their children, at the life they had built from nothing, and shake his head in wonder that this was his life, that this beautiful, strong, amazing woman was his wife. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Kane took Lydia back to the place where he had proposed, the hidden canyon with its spring and cottonwood trees. The children stayed with their grandfather for the night, and Kane and Lydia spent the evening talking and remembering, looking back on all they had been through together. "Do you ever regret it?" Kane asked as they sat watching the stars come out. "Marrying me, taking on this hard life, giving up the comfort you could have had?" Lydia turned to look at him, seeing the gray that was beginning to thread through his dark hair, the lines that hard work and sun had carved into his face, the calluses on his hands from a lifetime of labor. He was 37 now, not the young cowboy who had pulled her from the quicksand, but he was still the man she loved with all her heart. "Never," she said firmly, "not for a single moment. You gave me everything I ever wanted, Kane. Love, a home, a family, a partnership. You gave me a life worth living. How could I ever regret that?" Kane pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I was so scared that day," he admitted, "when I saw you in that quicksand, sinking, and I did not know if I could get you out in time. I had just met you, did not even know your name yet, but I was already terrified of losing you. And now, 10 years later, I am still terrified of losing you, because you are everything to me." "You will not lose me," Lydia promised. "We are in this together, for the rest of our lives. That is what marriage means, what partnership means. We face whatever comes together." And they did. When drought came in 1894 and they lost a third of their herd, they faced it together, tightening their belts and working harder to rebuild. When Matthew broke his arm falling from a horse, they faced that together, taking turns sitting up with him at night when the pain was bad. When Mr. Foster finally passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1896, they grieved together, and Kane helped Lydia settle her father's affairs and decide what to do with the store. In the end, they sold the store but kept the building, turning the upper floor where Lydia had grown up into a rental property that provided a small but steady income. It was another step toward security, toward building something that would last beyond their own lives, something they could pass down to their children. The turn of the century found the Iverson family prosperous by frontier standards, with a successful ranch, healthy children, and a love that had only deepened with time. Matthew was 16 now, and working the ranch alongside his father, already as capable as many grown men. Sarah was 14, beautiful and clever, helping her mother manage the household and showing signs of becoming a fine woman. James was 10, still young but eager to follow in his brother's footsteps. When Lydia discovered she was pregnant again at 38, it was a surprise but not an unwelcome one. Their fourth child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in 1901, and the whole family fell in love with her immediately. Matthew and Sarah doted on their baby sister, and even James, who had previously been the baby of the family, seemed delighted to have a younger sibling to help care for. Kane, holding his infant daughter and watching his wife nurse her with the practiced ease of a woman who had done this 3 times before, felt his heart overflow with gratitude. This was his life, his family, his legacy, everything he had ever wanted and more than he had ever dreamed possible. "Remember when I was just a cowboy with nothing to my name?" he asked Lydia one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the children play in the yard. Matthew was teaching James how to rope a practice post, while Sarah held Rose and sang to her. "I remember a man who threw me a branch and pulled me from the quicksand," Lydia said, her hand finding his. "A man who gave me hope when I was terrified, who protected my reputation when he could have taken advantage, who loved me when he thought he had no right to. That man was never just a cowboy to me, Kane. He was everything." Kane brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "And you were the woman who saw something in me worth loving, who took a chance on a future that was far from certain, who stood by me through every hardship and never complained, never gave up. You made me into the man I am today, Lydia. All of this, everything we have built, it is because of you." "It is because of us," Lydia corrected. "We did this together, just like we do everything. Partners, remember?" "Partners," Kane agreed, pulling her close. "For the rest of our lives." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep contentment. Matthew married a local girl named Emma in 1905 and brought her to live on the ranch, building a small house on the property so they could start their own family while still helping with the family business. Sarah surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to become a teacher, and with her parents' support, she went to Salt Lake City to attend the teaching college there. James grew into a quiet, thoughtful young man who loved the land as much as his father did, and Rose, the baby of the family, was bright and spirited and seemed determined to keep up with her older brothers no matter what they were doing. In 1910, when Kane was 54 and Lydia was 47, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by family and friends. Matthew and Emma had given them 2 grandchildren, and Sarah had returned from Salt Lake City with a teaching certificate and a husband, a lawyer named William, who had fallen in love with her intelligence and determination. Even James, at 20, was courting a sweet girl from town, though he had not yet proposed. As Kane looked around at the gathering, at all the people who had become part of their lives, part of their extended family, he felt a sense of completion. This was what he had been working toward all these years, not just the land or the cattle or the money in the bank, but this sense of belonging, of legacy, of having built something that would endure. "What are you thinking about?" Lydia asked, coming to stand beside him. She was still beautiful to him, though her dark hair was now streaked with silver and time had softened the curves of her youth. She was the woman he loved, the mother of his children, his partner in every way that mattered. "I am thinking about that day in December," Kane said, "when I heard you calling for help and rode up to find you trapped in the quicksand. I'm thinking about how that one moment, that one decision to help led to all of this, to you, to our children, to this life we have built. It amazes me sometimes how one day can change everything." "It was not just one day," Lydia said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It was every day after that. Every choice we made to love each other, to work together, to build something lasting. The quicksand brought us together, but it was everything else that kept us together." Kane wrapped his arm around her, holding her close the way he had done 1,000 times before and would do 1,000 times more. "You are right," he agreed, "but I'm still grateful for that day, for the chance it gave me to meet you, to love you, to spend my life with you." "As am I," Lydia said softly. "As am I." They stood together on their porch, watching the sun set over the land they had claimed from the desert through sheer determination and love, surrounded by the family they had created and the legacy they would leave behind. The quicksand that had nearly claimed Lydia's life had instead given her everything she had ever wanted, and the cowboy who had thrown her a branch and pulled her out had become the love of her life, her partner, her home. It was a story they told their grandchildren, and eventually their great-grandchildren, about how they had met and fallen in love in the wild west of Utah in the winter of 1881. It was a story about courage and rescue, about taking chances and building dreams, about how sometimes the most terrifying moments of our lives lead us to exactly where we are meant to be. And it was a story that always ended the same way, with two people who loved each other deeply, who had built a life together through hard work and devotion, growing old side by side on the land they had claimed, surrounded by the family their love had created. Kane and Lydia Iverson lived long lives, watching their children and grandchildren prosper, seeing the ranch they had built continue to thrive under Matthew's capable management. When Kane finally passed away peacefully in 1925 at the age of 70, he died holding Lydia's hand, surrounded by 4 generations of the family they had created together. Lydia followed him just 2 years later, dying quietly in her sleep at the age of 64, and was buried beside her husband on a hill overlooking their ranch. Their graves were marked with simple headstones that bore their names, the dates of their births and deaths, and a single line that Matthew had chosen. Together they built a legacy of love. And that legacy lived on in their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and all the generations that came after, all of them carrying forward the values that Kane and Lydia had lived by: hard work, honesty, devotion, and above all, love. The ranch remained in the family for over a century, a testament to what two people could build when they committed to each other and to their shared dreams. The story of the woman trapped in quicksand covered by fresh snow, and the cowboy who threw her a branch and pulled her out, became a family legend told and retold with each generation. It was a reminder that love often comes when we least expect it, that courage and kindness are the greatest virtues, and that the choices we make in moments of crisis can shape the rest of our lives. For Kane and Lydia, that moment in December of 1881 was the beginning of everything, the foundation upon which they built a life worth living, a love worth celebrating, and a legacy worth leaving behind. They had faced the hardships of frontier life together, had raised a family in the harsh beauty of the Utah desert, and had proven that with determination, partnership, and love, anything was possible. Their story was one of triumph over adversity, of two people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and chose to build something beautiful together. It was a love story in the truest sense, not because it was easy or without challenges, but because they faced those challenges together and emerged stronger for it. And on warm summer evenings, when the family gathered at the ranch for celebrations and reunions, someone would always tell the story again of how great-grandma Lydia was trapped in quicksand covered by fresh snow, and how great-grandpa Kane threw her a branch and pulled her out, and in doing so saved not just her life, but gave both of them a future beyond their wildest dreams. It was a story that never got old, because it was more than just a story. It was the truth of how their family began, how love can bloom in the most unexpected places, and how one act of courage and kindness can echo through generations, creating a legacy that lasts forever.